Ethan Vance had built his empire on predicting every outcome. He could model the markets, forecast political shifts, and anticipate his rivals' next moves with a chilling, almost supernatural precision. He was a man who lived in the future, carefully constructing it piece by piece. But he hadn't predicted this. The plane had landed, the cabin lights flickering to life with a soft hum. Passengers were already on their feet, the quiet roar of 100 hushed conversations filling the air. They tugged suitcases, murmured plans, and glanced at their watches, eager to get back to the lives they had left behind. Ethan was near the front, waiting. He was a man accustomed to silence, even within chaos, a quiet center in a loud world. He moved with a kind of deliberate grace, a stillness that made others step aside. That stillness shattered the moment he saw her. She was 3 rows ahead, her figure stepping into the aisle with an easy, familiar fluidity. Dark hair, pulled back into a simple knot at her neck. A worn denim jacket he remembered from a rainy afternoon in Cambridge. Then he heard it, a voice he hadn't heard in a decade, speaking softly to 2 little girls by her side. "Don't forget your backpacks, girls." The voice was low, melodic, a sound that had been a permanent fixture in his memory. And then it hit him. The girls. 2 of them. 10, maybe 11 years old. Identical. Their eyes, gray, sharp, a startlingly familiar shade of slate. Their jaws, even the quiet, focused way they scanned the crowd, looked exactly like him. It was a mirror held up to a ghost, a reflection of a life he had walked away from. Time cracked. The noise of the cabin, the restless energy of the crowd, all of it faded into a dull, distant roar. Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. He just stared as if watching a version of his own childhood, unfolding in real time, mirrored back at him through 2 strangers with his DNA. The woman, Margot. She turned, as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met across the crowded aisle. For a second, the world fell away. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. Her face hardened, not with anger, but with something colder. Distance. A shield. She placed a protective hand on one of the girl's shoulders. Then she walked. Directly down the aisle, she passed him without a word. The girls followed, their small backpacks bouncing against their small shoulders. By the time Ethan remembered how to breathe, they were disappearing through the gate, a fleeting glimpse of a life that wasn't his. A decade ago, he'd walked away from Margot. He'd chosen a deal in Zurich over a life with her, believing that the empire he was building was the only path to true significance. It was a choice made with cold logic. No tears, no drama, just an exit. He'd told her it was for the best, that he was becoming a man who couldn't be a partner to anyone. She hadn't chased him. He hadn't looked back. Until now. Now, 2 pairs of gray eyes were looking at him from the past, and no one had said a thing. Ethan didn't leave the terminal right away. He sat at gate 12 for nearly an hour, motionless, the crumpled boarding pass still in his hand. The world around him moved at a high speed, a blur of travelers rushing to make connections and flight attendants announcing final calls. But Ethan heard none of it. His mind was stuck on 3 faces. Margot, and those 2 girls. Their faces had followed him off the plane, into the terminal, and now into every corner of his thoughts. He knew what he saw. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was recognition. But why hadn't she told him? When he finally got to the curb, the cool evening air was a shock. His driver, a man named Leo who had worked for him for 5 years, opened the door of the black sedan without a word, sensing his boss's uncharacteristic stillness. Ethan slid in. He said nothing and stared out the window as the city's lights blurred into streaks of color. His mind was a maelstrom of memories. A humid afternoon, sitting on the porch of a small rental in Cambridge. Margot, her hair down, sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing?" he'd asked. "Our life," she'd said. What it could be. A fight. The last one. "You only see in numbers, Ethan. People aren't data points. A life isn't an investment portfolio," she'd yelled, her voice trembling with emotion he'd never understood. He shook his head, pushing the memories away. "Home or the office, sir?" Leo asked. His voice a low rumble. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he opened his phone. He swiped through old cloud folders, past financial reports, market analysis, and countless spreadsheets, until he found it. A single photo, taken one summer morning in Cambridge, Margot laughing in the sun, wearing his button-down shirt, barefoot, on the back porch of their rental house. She was holding a mug he hated. He remembered it clearly. He'd made fun of it the day they moved in. Said it looked like something a father would give his daughter on a camping trip. Ethan hadn't thought about that memory in years, but now it felt like a door that had been shut too long, a promise he had broken to himself. He looked up. His face set. "Take me to the office," he said. The building stood as a monument to everything he'd sacrificed. 46 stories of steel and glass, a gleaming testament to his ambition. No children, no family, only strategy, precision, and the sterile silence of success. He sat at his desk, staring out at the city skyline, and let the thoughts settle. They were his, and Margot had kept them from him for 10 years. Why? Was it punishment? Protection? Or did she genuinely believe he didn't deserve to know? His jaw tightened. The Ethan of a decade ago would have let it go. He would have buried it under profit margins and quarterly targets. But that man was a ghost now. This was different. This was a wound he couldn't close. He picked up the phone and called Olivia, his chief of staff. Her voice was sharp, professional, cutting through the silence. "I need a background check," he said. "Her name is Margot Sinclair, and if she has children, I want to know everything." Everything. The next afternoon, the file landed on his desk. Thin, simple, unassuming. But Ethan knew not to judge the weight of something by its thickness. Olivia stood at the doorway, her tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. "She moved to Vermont after you two split," she said carefully. "Got her PhD, teaches sociology at a small liberal arts college. Doesn't post much on social media. She seems to live a very private life." Ethan didn't look up. His fingers moved slowly, opening the folder as if it might explode with the force of the secrets it contained. "And the girls?" Olivia hesitated. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She had seen Ethan in every state imaginable, angry, victorious, ruthless, but never like this. Then she continued. "Ivy and June Sinclair, 10 years old. No father listed on the birth certificates. 10 years old." The math wasn't hard. Ethan leaned back. The leather chair groaned under him. His eyes scanned the 2 small school portraits attached to the report. Ivy with a quiet intensity in her gaze, June smiling with a hint of defiance, one reserved, the other radiant, both unmistakably his. The world tilted on its axis. He saw a photograph of a small house in the woods, a photo of a woman, a younger Margot, smiling, holding 2 infants wrapped in blankets. He saw a life, a beautiful, messy, real life that he had never known. "They've never lived outside of Vermont," Olivia added, her voice softer now. "Excellent students, private school, a stable life. She's built a good life for them, sir." He closed the file slowly, as if the information needed time to settle in his bloodstream. Margot hadn't just walked away. She had built something without him. For a man who had mastered ownership of companies, of markets, of people's attention, this was a new kind of pain. One he couldn't buy his way out of. One that had been there all along, and he had been too blind to see it. "Do they know?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia shook her head. "There's no public indication they do. Not from anything we've found." There was a long silence. "Thank you," he finally said. She left, the door clicking shut, leaving him alone with the weight of the past. Ethan looked at the folder for a long time. He had walked away from Margot, believing he was doing her a favor, freeing her from the burden of what he was becoming. But he had never considered what it meant for her to carry it all alone. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city he used to conquer. Now, all he wanted was to be seen. Not by investors, not by Forbes. By two small girls who didn't even know his name. Act 2. The soft knock. The gallery was tucked quietly at the edge of town, between a small, bustling bakery and a bookstore that had probably been there since before smartphones existed. The sign over the door was hand-painted, its letters a little worn. Sinclair and Colloquial Art. Honest Stories. Ethan parked across the street and sat in the car, engine off. Vermont in October was beautiful, and for the first time in years, he noticed the world around him. Burnt orange leaves drifted across the windshield, a gentle, silent procession. Inside the gallery, Margot moved among canvases with practiced grace, her movements fluid and sure. She was guiding two older women through an exhibit, not like a curator selling art, but like a teacher, leading a quiet conversation. Her voice, calm and confident, drifted faintly through the glass. She hadn't changed in the things that mattered. Still deliberate, still focused. But now he saw something new in her posture. Strength forged in solitude. Ethan got out of the car. He walked across the street, the small, quiet town feeling 1,000,000 miles away from the steel canyons of New York. He opened the gallery door. A small bell chimed. Margot turned. The polite smile on her face vanished instantly. Her guests glanced at each other, sensing a shift in the air, a tension that needed no words. She excused herself and walked toward him, her arms crossed. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "I just wanted to see you. Congratulations, you've seen me. Now leave." He hesitated. "They're beautiful," he said in a low voice, "and they're mine." Margot's eyes flashed with a fire he hadn't seen in a decade. "You have no right to say that. You gave that right up a long time ago. I need to talk to you." She led him to a small, private back room. "You left, Ethan. You vanished. And now you show up 10 years later, playing detective. What exactly do you want?" He looked at her, honest for the first time in a long time. "I want to know them. I want to understand what I missed." She let out a quiet, bitter laugh that held no humor. "What you missed? 3 a.m. diaper blowouts, fevers, scraped knees, school drop-offs, science projects, first words, first songs, first everything." Her voice was soft, but each word was a hammer blow. "You missed a decade of my life, Ethan, and their lives, and I don't know what makes you think you have any claim to them now." He took a deep breath, steadying himself against her words. "I know I have no claim. I know I made a mistake. A huge one. I'm not asking for a do-over. I'm asking for... what's next? Let me be a part of what comes next." Margot looked at him for a long moment. She saw the man she knew, but also something new. A man humbled, broken by a truth he couldn't control. Then, with visible effort, she said, "If you want to know them, it's on my terms. No surprises, no drama. Just you as a friend, Not their father. Not yet. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was more than he expected. "I'll take it," he said. Margot nodded, though her eyes held more caution than trust. "Friday, after school. There's a cafe by the library. I'll text you the name." Then she turned and walked away. He watched her go, each step measured, each breath controlled. She had built a world without him. Now he was being given the chance to knock softly. The cafe was warm, cluttered, and smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Ethan arrived early. No briefcase, no suit, just a navy sweater, jeans, and the strangest sensation in his chest. Nerves. He had faced investors who could scuttle billion-dollar deals with a single look. But this felt bigger. He chose a table in the corner by the window. He bought 3 hot chocolates and waited. At exactly 3:47, Margot walked in with the twins. Ivy was the first to notice him. She stopped mid-step, her eyes narrowing slightly. Not suspicious, just observant. June followed, her curls bouncing, her gaze going back and forth between the pastries and the people, her face a mask of curious energy. Margot nodded. Professional. Reserved. "Girls," she said, placing a soft hand on their backs. "This is Ethan, an old friend of mine." June slid into the seat across from him without hesitation. Ivy sat beside her, arms crossed, her eyes still on him, a silent question in their depths. "Hi," Ethan said, keeping his voice light. "Thanks for meeting with me." June smiled. "Do you like chocolate croissants?" "I do," he grinned, "especially the ones with extra chocolate." She lit up. "That's the only kind worth eating." Ivy, still quiet, studied him. Not shy, just cautious. Ethan didn't push. He asked about school. Favorite books? Soccer. He let them lead. He learned Ivy liked astronomy. June preferred music. They both hated math. Margot watched from across the table. She didn't speak much, but she didn't interrupt either. At one point, June leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Do you have any kids?" Ethan paused. A beat. He glanced at Margot, who shook her head slightly. "Not yet," he said softly. "Not yet." June nodded, satisfied, and went back to her croissant. When it was time to go, Ivy stood first. June gathered their napkins into a neat pile. "Can we come again?" June asked, her eyes hopeful. Margot answered. "Maybe." They stepped out into the autumn wind. Ivy and June ran ahead, chasing fallen leaves. Margot stopped. Ethan looked at her. "Thank you. This doesn't mean anything," she said, looking straight ahead. "Not yet." "I know." She turned to leave, but she stopped. "They asked about you, when we got home from the flight." His heart jumped. "What did you say?" Margot met his eyes. "I said I didn't know what kind of man you were anymore." Then she walked away. And for the first time, Ethan understood. The past entitled him to nothing. He would have to earn it, step by step. Act 3. The earning. Over the next few weeks, Ethan showed up without fail. He didn't push. He didn't stay longer than necessary. He learned when to talk, and when silence mattered more. He helped June fix the strap on her violin case. He bought Ivy a telescope kit, not as a gift, but because she had mentioned once, in a quiet voice, that she liked to look at the sky but couldn't see enough from her bedroom window. Margot remained distant, but present. She monitored everything. His tone, his patience, his consistency, his trustworthiness. To her, it wasn't something given. It was audited. She was making sure this man, this ghost from the past, was real this time. One Saturday, the girls had soccer practice. Ethan offered to drive them. Margot hesitated, then nodded. On the field, June was a whirlwind of energy. Ivy, more focused. played defense. Ethan stood on the sidelines, hands in his pockets, his eyes never leaving them. After the game, Ivy sat alone on the bench, untying her cleats. Ethan walked over slowly. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. She looked up, cautious but curious. "You played a great game today. That block in the second half was all instinct." Ivy shrugged. "Coach says I think too much." Ethan smiled. "That's not always a bad thing." A pause, then her quiet voice. "Why do you keep coming?" He didn't answer right away. The truth needed air. "Because I miss so much time," he said, "and I don't want to miss any more." Ivy looked at her shoes. "You're not really a friend of Mom's, are you?" Ethan froze, not in fear, but at the precision of her question. "I was," he said carefully. "A long time ago. Then I made a mistake. A big one." She looked up. "Did she cry?" He swallowed. The memory of that last conversation, of Margot's quiet resolve, flooded him. "I don't know. She didn't let me see her." Ivy studied him, weighing the words. Then she nodded slowly. "Just once." June ran up a second later, grabbing her hand. "Come on! Mom said we can get cider donuts." He stood up, Ivy trailing behind, her eyes softer now. Still watchful, but no longer distant. That night, back in his hotel room, Ethan stared at the ceiling and whispered into the darkness. "They're not just my daughters. They're her daughters." He wasn't just trying to win over two girls. He was trying to win back one woman's belief that people could change. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything shifted. Margot had called to say the girls were at their pediatrician's checkup, and Ethan felt a strange pull to wait outside the clinic. He didn't go in. He didn't ask to participate. He just sat in his car, watching the front door, unsure why the sight of them leaving safely mattered more than any quarterly report. But then, panic. A nurse ran out. Voices rose. Margot's shoulders tensed. Everything Ethan had feared but couldn't name became real. June was crying. Ivy had fainted. He was out of the car before his mind caught up. He pushed the door open. Nurses moved fast. A gurney. An oxygen mask. Ivy's face was pale. Her lips trembled. "Cardiac arrhythmia," a nurse said. "Mild, but she needs more tests." Margot was frozen. Ethan moved to her side and put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Hours passed. Ivy was stable, resting, connected to monitors, her breathing even. Margot sat by the bed, silent, a hand gently stroking her daughter's hair. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, fighting the guilt in his chest. He spoke in a low voice. "I should have known." Margot turned slowly. "How? You're not a doctor. You're not here." He had no answer. "Do you think this is about showing up now and proving you care?" she whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion. "It's about who held her hand when she was scared the first time, and the second, and the 100th. It's about being the person she counts on when a fever spikes in the middle of the night." He nodded. "I know. You did it. Alone. I see that now. All of it. The years I missed. The burdens you carried." She looked back at Ivy, her eyes tired. "I'm not asking you to fix anything, Ethan. Just don't make promises you won't keep." Later that night, as the hospital quieted and the machines beeped with a slow, steady rhythm, Ivy's eyes opened. "Hey," Ethan said softly. She blinked. "You stayed?" He smiled. "Of course." She hesitated. Then she asked, "Are you my dad?" The words landed like a silent earthquake. Ethan sat down, took a deep breath, and answered the only way he could. "Yes, I am." She said nothing more, just reached out her hand and took his, and for the first time in 10 years, Ethan Vance felt like he belonged somewhere. Act 4. The Path Forward. Ethan stayed with her through the night. Margot didn't ask him to leave. She didn't say anything at all. When the morning light crept through the blinds, Ivy was asleep again, her hand still wrapped around his fingers. Ethan rose slowly, his body stiff, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. In the hallway, Margot sat on a bench, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked at him, no longer angry, just exhausted. "Did I tell her the truth?" he said softly. Margot nodded. Not in approval, just in acknowledgement. "She already knew," she whispered. "She's always been the quiet observer. June asks questions. Ivy just watches until she understands." Ethan sat beside her. The silence between them was no longer awkward. "She held my hand," he said. "No one's done that in a long time without wanting something." Margot glanced sideways. "And now you want something?" "Yes," he admitted. "But not for me. I want them to have a dad. I want you to have help." She didn't reply. Later that week, Ivy was released from the hospital with medication and a new chart of monitoring instructions. Ethan drove them home. June sat in the back, talking non-stop about the doctor who let her try a stethoscope. Ivy was quiet, but she smiled at the sound of her sister's voice. At the Sinclair house, Margot walked ahead, unlocking the door. The girls ran in, their backpacks thumping against the hallway wall. Ethan stood on the porch. Margot turned. "Are you coming in?" He looked at her, unsure. "Do you want me to?" She studied him for a long moment. "I don't know who you are now," she said, "but I know who you were." "And that man," she continued in a steady voice, "would have never sat by a hospital bed all night without checking his phone." Ethan nodded. "I'm trying not to be him anymore." She opened the door wider. "Then come inside." Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old books. Photos lined the staircase. None of him, of course, but filled with life. Halloween costumes, birthday cakes, art projects. Margot set down her keys and said quietly, "They're going to have more questions. You have to be ready." "I am." She paused. Then she added, "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan, but you have to be honest." He looked around the home she had built without him, and for the first time it didn't feel like he was an intruder. "I can do that," he said. One honest day at a time. Autumn melted into winter. The days grew shorter and the air sharper. But Ethan stayed. He no longer hovered outside. He showed up to school plays, piano recitals, and doctor's appointments. He knew Ivy's medication schedule by heart. He practiced times tables with June on the kitchen floor. He learned to exist in their world without asking for the center of attention. One evening, Margot was at the sink doing dishes, while the girls debated what movie to watch. Ethan was drying dishes beside her. "You've integrated as if you never left," she said. "I never really arrived the first time," he replied. She looked at him, tired but soft. "You're still good with words. I've learned to use them better," he said. "But I know they're not enough." Margot nodded. Later that night, when the girls were asleep, Margot asked him to stay for a little longer. They sat in the living room, a fire crackling softly. She pulled a photo album from the shelf and set it in front of him. "I debated whether to show you," she said. "But they are a part of you, even if you missed the beginning." Ethan opened the book. First steps, first drawings, first day of school. In every picture, Margot was there, kneeling beside them, hugging them, lifting them up. Alone. His throat tightened. "You were everything," he said. "I had to be," she replied. "You didn't give me another choice." "I'm sorry," she met his eyes. "I know." They sat there, the quiet, the firelight, the weight of a decade of shared grief and quiet triumph wrapping around them. Then a sound from the stairs. Ivy, in 2 big pajamas, holding a book. "Mom?" Margot smiled. "You're supposed to be asleep." Ivy walked in, her eyes flickering between them. "I had a dream. I was little again, and Dad was there." Ethan's heart stopped. Margot pulled the blanket from the back of the couch and held it open. "Come sit." Ivy climbed in beside her. Ethan instinctively leaned over, brushing her hair behind her ear. The 3 of them sat there, quiet. Forgiveness didn't come like a bolt of lightning. It came like this, small, silent, shared. Act 5. The recital. The auditorium was not grand. Folding chairs, a makeshift stage, string lights taped over the curtains. But to Ethan, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. He stood in the back, hands clasped, his heart quiet, but expectant. The program was crumpled in his pocket. Winter recital featuring Ivy and June Sinclair. Piano duet. Margot sat 3 rows ahead, her shoulders relaxed, her scarf draped gracefully over her coat. She turned once to look at him, a subtle nod that he took as a promise. The room dimmed. On stage, Ivy and June sat side by side at the piano, their backs straight, fingers poised. The opening notes were soft, measured. Then, gradually, the rhythm built. Delicate, but sure, like a conversation between 2 voices that knew each other by heart. Ethan didn't breathe. The tune they played wasn't just music, it was their story. The pauses, the restraint, the bursts of courage among silent doubts. At the final chord, the silence held for an instant before the applause erupted. Parents stood, their phones raised, the moment captured and immortalized by shaky hands and blurry lenses. But Ethan didn't move until June leaned into the microphone. "Before we go," she said, her voice small but sure, "we want to thank someone special." Ivy stood beside her, looking toward the back of the room. "Someone who didn't hear our first song 10 years ago," June continued, "but hasn't missed one since." Ethan felt every eye turn toward him. Ivy said, "But we think he's doing a good job." June smiled. "We love you, Dad." The applause roared back to life, but Ethan barely heard it. His eyes were stinging. He took a step forward, slowly, into the aisle, no longer a guest, no longer a stranger trying to belong, a father. After the recital, Margot met him by the door, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "They wrote that part," she said. He looked at her, his voice rough. "I didn't expect." "Neither did I," she cut in softly. "But here we are." A beat passed. "I was wrong before," she added. "You didn't just show up. You stayed." He smiled petulantly. "And I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, softening. "Come on. The girls want hot chocolate." Outside, the snow had begun to fall. Thin, silent, fleeting. But it was real. And this time, so was he. Interactive questions. If you were Ethan, what would be the hardest part about earning back Margot's trust? Do you think Ivy's question at the hospital, "Are you my dad?" was a moment of instinct or a planned test? How does the theme of silence change for Ethan throughout the story? What do you think is the true meaning of the girl's final message to him at the recital? Calls to action. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and share it with a friend. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the ending. Subscribe for more stories like this one.